Sikkim 365 and Baylor Plus have teamed up to bring Baylor fans the ultimate content bundle. You can sign up now for $17.99 a month, a $5 monthly savings, and get instant access to all premium content on both websites. For more information, visit either sikkim365.com or baylorplus.com today. What's up, Baylor family? Welcome into another episode of Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. Today, Grace and I will provide an outlook on the bowl game situation for Baylor. Obviously, a couple months ago, we didn't know if this was going to be a reality, but here we are. We're going to be able to talk about it today. Baylor finished 5th in the Big 12 standings, which sets them up pretty well for the bowl game pecking order, which the Big 12 doesn't have to follow that exact order, but it does kind of give them a guideline. And then with all the Pac-12 situation, with the new schools in, they're still tied to the Pac-12 bowls, which throws it for another loop and kind of generates some more weird situations that we'll talk about in just a minute. But along with that, we're also going to talk about the all Big 12 selections for the Baylor football team. We'll finish that up at the end. But first, Grayson, let's get started with these bowl situations. We know that Baylor will not be in the Alamo Bowl. That game has already kind of been set. It's either going to be one of the top 4 teams in the standing, depending on who wins the Big 12 championship. It's either going to be Iowa State or Arizona State. And then depending on who wins and who's slotted in there from the opposing conference, is either going to be BYU or Colorado, which is really interesting because they're conference teams, but they're going to play each other in the Big 12, in the Alamo Bowl, which typically you have offsetting. You're not playing someone from your same conference. That's just how it worked out this year. Baylor's not going to be in there, but what do you expect to see in this game to kind of set us up for bowl season?
It's really smart by the Alamo Bowl. Because they could have technically taken Washington State or Oregon State or whatnot, but you got to take the biggest brand. And so that's kind of what they did here, I think, with getting Colorado or Arizona State in this game. I think if Arizona State loses to Iowa State, I still believe Colorado will be the one they take, which will draw a lot of eyeballs, a lot of attention. Then they'll take on BYU most likely. I think it's really interesting, and I think it's a weird dynamic because you got 2 Big 12 teams playing each other most likely. But this was a bowl game that I was kind of hoping Baylor would be able to sneak into, but obviously not going to happen at this point, which is fine. There's some other really good options I know we're going to talk about.
Yeah, so had in that last weekend of the regular season, had any team in the top 4 lost, Baylor could have snuck into the Alamo Bowl. But it's just the way that the standings played out. Had Baylor been in the top 4, if Iowa State or one of those teams they would have been tied with, they could have jumped up there and made the selections committee look at this a little bit differently, but they're not. They're in 5th place. They're going to go with one of these other teams, which is perfectly fine, which leads us to the next line on the list for the Pop-Tarts Bowl in Orlando. It's a game on December 28th, and this is the one that's still – there's 2 bowl games that Baylor's kind of looking at, starting with the Pop-Tart Bowl. There's a potential for Baylor to get in this one, and it really comes down to the slotting of which Big 12 team is going to get it. It's in Orlando. It's the highest one on the list outside of the Alamo Bowl. So technically you want this bowl game. Now from a fan's perspective, traveling to it is difficult. But if Iowa State wins the Big 12 championship and goes to the playoff, BYU will possibly go to the Alamo Bowl. We don't know, exactly what's going to happen, but that's what it looks like as of now. And that means Baylor will be the next Big 12 team to be slotted for this game. And that would be in Orlando, as I mentioned, on December 28th. They would face an ACC opponent. But if that doesn't happen, Iowa State falls, Arizona State wins, Iowa State falls to the Alamo Bowl, then it pushes everybody down a little bit. Really interesting matchup here, and I know you like this one because of the ACC dynamic. I know we just talked about what potentially happens with the Big 12 championship impacts this one, but what are your thoughts on the Pop-Tarts Bowl and Baylor's potential to get there?
I really like the idea of Baylor playing in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. First of all, obviously, it's in Orlando. It's one of the cooler destinations that you could possibly play in. Last time Baylor was there, they had a pretty memorable moment in which they ran for like 1,000,000 yards in Orlando against North Carolina. It was called a different bowl at that time. Obviously, Pop-Tarts has been super creative with all of their bowl promotions. I just think it'd be a really fun game to play in, a fun bowl game to play in. And then the other part of this is, most likely they're going to play one of SMU, Clemson, or Miami if they were to be in this game. There's a chance it's Louisville if things, if they get two teams in the playoff or something like that. But all three of those matchups would be really interesting to watch. I mean, the idea of Baylor playing against Cam Ward in a bowl game would be pretty, if he played in the bowl game, which I guess he probably wouldn't, but that would be pretty interesting. And then, of course, SMU. With kind of the rivalry that was building there during the offseason from a recruiting standpoint.
Yeah.
That could be a really fun game to watch as well. So, yeah, the Pop-Tarts Bowl, very intriguing. It doesn't seem like many people are projecting that, though. It seems like a lot of Iowa State, and obviously that would mean Iowa State losing in the Big 12 championship, though.
Yeah, and we don't know at this point. I mean, we got to wait till that game plays out on Saturday between Iowa State and Arizona State. But I mean, it's realistic because if you just simply pick Iowa State to win the Big 12 championship, this is a very likely potential destination for Baylor because that means BYU's in the Alamo Bowl. But if Arizona State wins, then it pushes everybody down, like I mentioned. So it's the dynamic of not knowing, but then also who do these teams or bowl games decide to select? Because they don't have to stay in order. They can say, no, let's not take Baylor. Let's take someone that we think will travel better, or we want someone that's more local to us or something like that. I don't think that necessarily comes down to it. I think if Iowa State wins, Baylor's probably in this bowl just by understanding the dynamics of it all. I just think that's what's going to happen because no one's really, I mean, unless you're looking at Central Florida, no one's going to be right there locally to go. So it looks like Baylor would have a pretty good chance to make it in that one. But if they don't and they fall down one more, the next one is, I mean, Baylor fans would love this. It's the Texas Bowl. It's on December 31st. It's kind of a midday game. Actually, it's not a late night game. This is versus an SEC team. Baylor fans will show up for this one. 2018, Baylor fans showed out really well against Vanderbilt. This could be a lot of fun for a lot of reasons, but I think mainly because it's an SEC opponent, probably not Texas A&M since Texas A&M was just recently there, but you're talking about possibly LSU, which LSU fans would we'll see if they're indifferent on this particular game, but they would show out pretty well. This is the one that I'm looking forward to if it happens because of the ease of access. You can have a great crowd, but then also beating an SEC team, which is obviously the standard. We can debate if they want to be there or not, as they always talk about, but I think it would be a really good opportunity to propel Baylor if they were able to get in a matchup like this and then win. Throw in the fact that it's potentially Texas A&M, make it even that much more fun. I don't think Texas A&M necessarily wants to be there based on how their season went, but I should say their fans. I don't know how their team feel about it, but they will show up. You absolutely know that Texas A&M fans will show up. But a lot of things have to happen for them to get to this particular level. That means Arizona State wins the Big 12 championship. Iowa State would fall to the Alamo Bowl, and then BYU would fall to the Pop-Tarts Bowl, putting Baylor in the Texas Bowl for that potential selection. A lot of dynamics at play here, but what are your thoughts on possibly playing an SEC team in the Texas Bowl?
So I actually think if Iowa State loses in the Big 12 championship, I think they drop below BYU. And I think it's actually Iowa State who goes to the Pop-Tarts Bowl because they can pick the opponent. And that's what I've been seeing a lot of is the projection is Iowa State in the Pop-Tarts Bowl if they lose. So just adding that in there a little bit that, right now the red hot pick is if Arizona State wins, BYU, Colorado, and then Iowa State goes to the Pop-Tarts. But we'll see. All of that's going to play itself out. This seems like the most likely outcome for Baylor based on everything that I've read, everything I've seen, just kind of how things appear to be breaking for, the top four, kind of separate themselves, I guess, a little bit towards the end of the year. And so Baylor is kind of always playing catch up. So I think with the Texas Bowl, this one makes a lot of sense for a ton of reasons. The location, like you said, this is probably the bowl outside the Alamo Bowl that would draw the biggest crowd from Baylor. And so that's cool and very intriguing. You get to play an SEC team, like you mentioned, which is also, I think, like you said, a standard and something that you want. The options that I've seen, I've seen some Arkansas, a whole lot of LSU recently, a little bit of A&M. And then I think the other one that I saw, or no, this is in the Liberty Bowl. But yeah, those three are the main three that I've been seeing a lot of in that bowl game. And truthfully, outside, A&M would be a tough matchup just because they're so good defensively, kind of similar to Houston, even better than Houston, to be honest. And then, but the other two, man, I mean, Baylor's probably scoring, 40 points against LSU and against Arkansas. So it'd be a fun shootout type game.
Yeah, I think that when you get to bowl games, you're talking about teams that wanted to go to the playoff, win their conference championships.
Mhm.
Baylor's in a different direction than that right now. There's a lot of excitement building. Guys aren't going to be sitting out of this bowl game more than likely. Guys that are preparing for the draft, et cetera. And I think this would just be a kind of a statement on top of the season that they finished. Obviously, Sawyer Robertson coming back, playing in a bowl game to propel him into next year. Really, the entire offense kind of building on what they did this year. You feel good about a matchup there, depending on who they face. Arkansas might be a different situation than maybe Texas A&M or LSU. Because of the way their season went. They were fighting for a bowl game just like Baylor was. So would be a very intriguing matchup. And you mentioned, or we talked about the 2018 bowl game against Vanderbilt. That was a lot of fun. The shootout with Vanderbilt, which was, that was before the last couple of years where Vanderbilt really elevated in their with Scott Lee there as their head coach. But that game, I was there. I don't know if you were there. It was a lot of fun. Great atmosphere. A lot of Baylor fans, and that was for a 6-6 team. That was not nearly as much excitement as this team has had to end the season.
Yeah, and we had an awesome tailgate at that game. I remember.
Oh yeah,
we had the gumbo outside. I mean, that was a really fun experience and a crazy game right after 1-11. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. I will say there was one other team that I saw in the projections here for the Texas Bowl, and it was Missouri. A former Big 12 team there as well. Again, a lot of these matchups like Arkansas and Missouri against Baylor would be a lot of fun for, the former Big 12 dynamic to it. But LSU, if this is the matchup, LSU is the team that I would lean towards wanting Baylor to play.
Yeah, no, I think the Pop-Tarts and the Texas Bowl present a lot of intriguing matchups. Yeah. The SMU game I'm indifferent on it for potentially in the Pop-Tarts Bowl, just from the standpoint of like, okay, how good, what is the standard of beating SMU? Is it going to create much buzz? But you beat Miami or you beat Clemson, then it really does. But in the Texas Bowl, pretty much any team that you face, and not that Arkansas is great or Missouri had, they had a down year compared to what they were expecting. But it's just one of those regional games that people take notice of, and will probably draw really well for TV even. But with that, after the Texas Bowl, it's the Liberty Bowl. That's also another bowl game versus an SEC team. That's in Memphis on December 27th. Baylor could potentially fall to this one. You're talking about maybe TCU or Texas Tech being taken over them to go to the Texas Bowl, which is they have the exact same records. There's a potential for that to happen. They both finished, all three of them finished 8-4 and 6-3 in Big 12 play. And that's, I guess it's possible. I think that Baylor fans have shown in the past that they're willing to show up for these games, especially locally. I don't know how the Texas Bowl would step over them, because I don't think TCU is going to draw that much better. Tech might. They may do that. I know they always draw well to the games in Dallas and stuff. So there's that potential. But the way Baylor's been playing, I wouldn't expect them to fall past the Texas Bowl. But if it's a Liberty Bowl, it's still pretty regional. It's an easy drive for a lot of people up to Memphis, and a really cool place to go see. I haven't looked at the matchups. You might have looked at these, who they could potentially face. Maybe it's Missouri. It might be one of those teams that don't make the Texas Bowl that they're facing in this one if it goes to that point. So the difference being is not as local, not as easy to get to for the Baylor fans who live in Texas.
Right. And this one, I think Liberty Bowl is praying that Baylor falls to them. I think they would love that, because I'm pretty sure Tech played in this game against, I want to say like Mississippi State rather recently or something along those lines. So I don't think they would necessarily be very intrigued by bringing Tech back. I think this is probably where TCU is going to end up. But that's just kind of my, outside looking in type view of this one. If Baylor does get this one, the matchups that I've seen, a whole lot of Arkansas. So it feels like Arkansas is probably going to drop to this bowl. And I think this is around the area that Baylor could play them. The other one I saw actually this week was Oklahoma as well as a potential matchup. Now that'd be cool. I would be very intrigued by that, just because Oklahoma, of course, just left the Big 12 so recently.
Yeah, and they just lost their starting quarterback to the transfer portal, so you don't know where their headspace is. Made offensive coordinator change, so if that happened, you never know. You get into that one, you have a pretty good chance of winning it, considering the path of the two programs at the moment. I think Memphis would be a really cool trip. I've being in that area before, not around the Christmas time, but it could be a really cool destination. Baylor hasn't been to that. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure they've been to the Liberty Bowl at some point, but it hasn't been recent. It hasn't been in the last 15 years for sure.
Right.
So it could be a cool place for Baylor fans to kind of congregate right there after Christmas before New Year's.
Yeah, and I will say this, just one thing to keep in mind with this bowl selection process. I think Baylor and TCU are going to be very valued, especially compared to like a Texas Tech who just made coordinator changes. I think that that's going to throw a little bit of a wrinkle into how excited they are about the bowl game and just kind of the state of the program type
Yeah.
stuff. I think it could play a factor in this. Obviously, fan attendance is also always a factor in this selection process, but I just think the way that Baylor and TCU are playing right now, I think they're going to be viewed a little bit higher than Tech, who finished with the same record.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously Baylor, they all finished with the same record. Baylor had the wins over both of them. They're kind of number one on the list. TCU beat Texas Tech, so they are the second in that
Yeah.
grouping, and then Tech. So if they just stay true to the standings, they kind of go along with what you're saying there. The next bowl on the list would be the Rate Bowl, which is in Phoenix versus the Big Ten on December 26th, or the day after Christmas. I mean, it would take a lot for that to happen to get down to that bowl. And then the last one that Baylor fans are probably like, heck no, we're not going. This one would be the Armed Forces Bowl. And I don't think, honestly, that Mac Rhodes would, I don't, not that he would throw a fit about it by any means, but he's praying that that one doesn't happen based on what happened a couple of years ago, which is versus a service academy. It's not a Big 12 tie necessarily. It's just whatever teams kind of match up with the service academy to fall there. That's on December 27th in Fort Worth at TCU Stadium. But yeah, I think that the worst case scenario to me is probably the Liberty Bowl, Texas Bowl being the most likely. So we kind of talked about it. If you're picking one game against one team, which bowl game are you picking and which is the opponent?
So the one that I'm going to go with, and it's very close here, but I like being different because I know what you're going to pick. So I like changing it up. I think playing in the Pop-Tarts Bowl would be really intriguing. And I think playing against, I'll mix it up. I think beating a Miami carries a lot of weight. My only issue with that game is I don't think Cam Ward would have any interest in
He's always
playing in that game.
Yeah.
So that's where it's kind of like, does that game really matter? Are people going to devalue it because of that? And so for that reason, I think I'd want them to play SMU or Clemson, whoever loses in that game, because I actually think those guys will play. Like, I think more their guys will play. And so why not? Let's do the Big 12 one. I think Pop-Tarts Bowl against SMU is the one I want to see the most.
Yeah, and I mean, in that game against potentially SMU, even if they lose and don't make the playoffs, I think that what you're going to get there is a SMU team that is extremely motivated because it's Baylor, or potentially a Big 12 team, and saying, hey, you kind of overlooked us in this conference realignment deal, and we want to bring you back to this. So I think or bring you back to it as in, hey, we want to make sure, we want to remind you that you should have taken us when you had the chance to. And then they have a good team. I mean, a lot of their guys, they're going to lose a lot of seniors, but at the same time, they have a lot of guys that will be coming back as well. I would assume those seniors, a lot of them would want to play in this game and not sit out as far as NFL aspirations. I don't think they have a ton of guys that are on that level, but they're a very good team. And there's just another statement, another feather in their cap. This isn't Texas A&M, who had a disappointed season, or a team that missed the playoffs that's not going to be motivated or not nearly as motivated. I don't see this SMU team that way. So it would be a very intriguing matchup. And as we saw from the offseason, there's a little bit of fire there between the two programs. And not that I don't think Baylor necessarily kind of did that, but I think it was just an organic thing. So it could be very intriguing. You talk about Keenan Hall, Baylor hiring away Keenan Hall from there. There's been some recruiting scuttle, flipping guys from those particular classes, or attempting to in a lot of cases. And it would be a lot of fun. Now, I wish that game would have been in Texas. You have that matchup in Texas to really bring it, but Orlando could be a good spot as well. Yeah, you're right on me, though. Like, I think the Alamo Bowl is the ultimate, and that just didn't work out for obvious reasons. But it's the Texas Bowl for me, and I think mainly because I want to see Baylor fans show up for a game and really make a statement. And if you give Baylor fans a chance to play Texas A&M, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think the SEC will allow that to happen. But they have a chance to play Texas A&M. Baylor fans are going to come out in droves, and they'll make a statement for that game because they want to see it. They haven't played Texas A&M since 2011, and they've kind of, the way they left the Big 12, that's a potential. But I think it's going to be a Baylor versus LSU if it falls to this one, and I think you have to love it. Like it's just you're going to hear all the LSU doesn't want to be there. They don't have the right. The players aren't going to want to be there. They didn't have the season that they wanted to have. But for Baylor to get the game and to win it, and possibly maybe you win it in big fashion, like you don't know what the situation is going to be, would be a really good statement for this program going into next year. I think there's a difference, even though LSU hasn't been as good, in beating LSU in a bowl game versus beating SMU. And that's kind of what sets me apart from the Pop-Tarts Bowl. It's just that cachet that comes, or the cash that comes with beating an SEC team like LSU who has had recent success.
I agree with you on that. And that's why it's like a 1A, 1B. We've talked about this before. Like playing in the Texas Bowl against LSU is like another very ideal situation for Baylor. The other thing with SMU or with LSU is that, Garrett Nussmeier is coming back. And so there's no reason for him to sit out in that game. So you're not getting a situation where the starting quarterback's not playing. And yeah, they're probably going to have guys who do sit out. Like it's LSU, it's the Pop-Tarts Bowl. Like a lot of guys, let's be real, will not care about that game. Whereas Baylor is definitely going to show up. I agree with the crowd comments. I will also say this, Houston, for an LSU team, they're going to show up too. Like regardless of how good they are, like that's kind of their recruiting area. Like that's an area that they take a lot of value in. And so, that'd be a lot of fun. That's definitely right up there on my wish list. Those two would be ideal. And honestly, they seem very likely. Like one of those options seems very likely, I think, for Baylor at this point.
Yeah, it does. I mean, unless something just goes crazy and they don't pick an order, I don't see that happening at this point, even though it's been discussed a little bit. So we'll see what happens. We'll know probably by the end of the day, Saturday, more of these will be coming out. I think even some of the Big 12 bowl games have been discussed. I don't know, West Virginia versus somebody, there's some stuff scuttle out there about that. But we'll know probably by Sunday, and we start making plans on where these games will be. So Baylor fans need to start watching out for those. So really exciting times for the football program. Obviously, the transfer portal picking up, just had signing day. Even though the football regular season's ended, there's a lot that's going to happen in the next month through Christmas. And then obviously even through February with signing day, the second signing day, and signing a lot of transfers. So should be a lot of fun. But on top of that, they just released all Big 12 teams. I was actually surprised that Baylor had four guys on the first team, one on the second team, and several honorable mentions. Now we're going to get into this briefly, but Sawyer Robertson was not mentioned at all as a quarterback, which was really intriguing considering some of the games that he had and the overall numbers that he put up. But I'll just run through these really quick. First team, kick return, punt returner, Josh Cameron. He was kick return first team with Jalen Noel of Iowa State. Jalen Noel actually won the special teams player of the year, co-special teams player of the year. Josh did not, but if you look at Josh's numbers, better numbers across the board, 14 returns, punt returns for 290 yards, 20.7 average. Noel had 13 returns for 199 yards for 15.3 average. So I don't know really what the dynamics were into picking him first, other than they're playing for the Big 12 championship.
Did Noel return kicks though too?
Yeah, but his numbers weren't. He had 53 total kick return yards. So I don't really know the dynamic there. And it's a big league, so a lot of coaches don't see the same teams. But Josh's numbers were phenomenal. Like he's a guy that could potentially be first team All-American punt returns and didn't win special teams player of the year for the conference. So Palmer Williams, first team All Big 12. Matt Jones, linebacker, first team. Keaton Thomas, first team linebacker. Michael Trigg, second team tight end. And then honorable mention, Omar Agbedian, Josh Cameron as a wide receiver, not a punt returner. Lorando Johnson at cornerback, Trevin Ma'ai at defensive line, Jackie Marshall at defensive line, and Gavin Yates as a fullback, which he basically played a hybrid tight end fullback role, which was really cool to see two tight ends essentially make the all conference teams for Baylor. A couple of other ones was Bryson Washington was honorable mention offensive newcomer of the year and freshman newcomer of the year. Keaton Thomas, defensive newcomer of the year. And then Josh Cameron, honorable mention special teams player of the year. So he actually had a vote for that, but didn't get it. And overall, good showing. I mean, you're talking about a really big conference now with 16 teams, so these spaces are limited. To have 4 first-team guys, I thought was pretty impressive.
It was, and I mean, I think it's appropriate to say this right now, but the position that Dave Aranda coaches on this Baylor team just had two first-team All-Americans at
Yeah.
linebacker. That
Big 12,
is
Big 12, not all American.
Big
Big
12.
12.
I'm sorry,
Big 12.
Big 12.
No,
Well,
no, you're
Big
good.
12 All Conference. Yeah,
All
yeah. I
conference. Yeah.
just think that that is incredible. I mean, to have two guys with the level of production that they both
Yeah.
had, to see Matt Jones in his final year go from a guy who was basically honorable mention was like the ceiling, I think, for him in a lot of ways, to moving up to first team in the Big 12 with a bigger
Yeah.
conference. I couldn't be more impressed. And that's why, we talk about the defense all year. It's pretty funny to see them have the two first team guys, even though we saw what the offense did. My other takeaway here is, come on, man. Like, Sora Robertson needs to be honorable mention at minimum. That is ridiculous. I
Okay.
personally think he should have been number 2 behind
Yeah.
Shador Sanders.
Yeah, I mean, it's either second team or honorable mention. I understand not first team. Like that was
Yeah.
not the expectation. But you look at his numbers, 28 total touchdowns. The next closest in Big 12 play only for quarterbacks was Levitt, and I believe that was a 19 or
Mhm.
18. So you're talking about almost 10 more total touchdowns. He had all but one game, at least 2 touchdowns, and then all the other games except for 2, he had 3 passing touchdowns. I don't know which coach didn't vote for him that he played. It was 5 touchdowns against Texas Tech, no interceptions in that game. Kansas, I guess, didn't vote for him after throwing for 4 touchdowns in that game. And that, that's what the really good running game. This wasn't like he was doing it all himself. He had a really good running game. It's like his stats would have been absolutely nuts if that running game hadn't progressed the way it did. I think that was the biggest oversight of the thing, and it has to fuel him for the offseason because, and I would assume Jake Spavital a little bit too, but 25 passing touchdowns or 26 passing touchdowns. That was second in the league and not even honorable mention. And this wasn't just like fluky stuff either.
No, I mean, Colt, he had the number 5 QBR in the entire country. Like,
Yeah.
not like by far in the Big 12, he led in that category, but in the country was a top 5 guy in QBR. What are we talking about here? Like I just don't understand how you can come away from this season, how it played out by the end of the year and really sit there and be like, he's not one of the top 3 quarterbacks in this league.
Yeah.
Like, come on, that's ridiculous. I think pretty much every coach in this league, aside from Dion, would trade their quarterback for Sora Robertson for this specific season.
Yeah. So there was 5 quarterbacks who received at least honorable mention. Sanders, Sam Leavitt from Arizona State, which that one's, I mean, I don't agree with the second team for him. He's in the Big 12 championship, and that's probably why he is. But he was second team. Honorable mention. Josh Hoover, get it, threw for a ton of yards. Honorable mention. Rocco Beck, Iowa State, okay, playing for the Big 12 championship, whatever. Jake Retzloff from BYU, okay, finished high in the league. Those were the 5 that got it. I would take Sawyer over all of them but Sanders. And in a lot of ways, I would take him over Sanders, but Sanders is just too good. Like, he was just too good as a passer. He had too good of a numbers. I understand why he got first team. For him to not even be listed with those guys is mind-blowing. And sorry to go on this rant here. Yeah, to go on this rant here.
Yeah, no, I cannot believe that's how this unfolded. I mean, you just named a bunch of guys who, yeah, they were fine, but I mean, we're talking about like, guys who have been game managers for a lot of this season. Like Sam Leavitt's good, but let's be real here. They're where they are because of Cam Scadaboo as far as the offense goes. You look at these other teams, they're where they are in large part sometimes to their run game or to the defense that they have. For Baylor, I mean, it was basically Sora Robertson for a lot of this year. I understand the run game came along late, but he was consistently awesome from the moment he started taking the snaps at Baylor and started being the first team guy. It was very evident, what he could do. So yeah, I was pretty disappointed in that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was – so just briefly, we'll look at these. BYU, he had 2 interceptions, but he had 4 total touchdowns in that game for 324 passing yards, 29 rushing yards. Iowa State, 3 touchdowns, 258. Texas Tech, 274 with 5 touchdowns. Oklahoma State, 222 with 3, but they ran the ball for like 400 yards in that game. You look at the TCU game, he only threw for 244. That was his game where he didn't do anything. They just ran the ball and TCU controlled the clock. He didn't have to throw it a ton. He threw it numbers-wise. He threw it quite a bit, but they didn't have to. West Virginia, 329, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. So I don't know if it was Neil Brown that didn't vote for him. He's upset. Kansas, 310, 4 touchdowns. And maybe, I mean, like, is it the Houston game that just took him off the list? I don't know. I mean, somebody didn't vote for him. Like, who was it? Joey? I mean, honestly, like, I don't know. Someone didn't vote for them that played him. And because you talk about, they had to play him more than likely to vote for him. So there's somebody that saw you had a really good performance and they said, no, I'm not voting for him. I mean, it's a bad look in general. And a lot of people probably have complaints. I get that. They have complaints, but he's not even honorable mention. And he was clearly the second best quarterback in the league. Like, there's not even denying it. Like, there's no way that you look at Big 12 numbers only. How do we even to this point that he's not even honorable mention?
And look at where Baylor got to once he became the starting quarterback from an offensive perspective. Like, they really struggled against Utah, and then he was in the fold, and their offense was really good, even in games they lost. So yeah, I find that to be a little bit ridiculous. And yeah, I mean, for if Texas Tech, if Joey McGuire, Lance Leipold, and Neil Brown didn't vote for him, that is just insane to me, and I think pretty ridiculous. And the guys you named, I think Sawyer is better than all of them. Again, I think their coaches would trade for Sawyer Robertson for one season over the guys that they have. I firmly believe that, outside of Deion Sanders, obviously.
Yeah, and he in those games you mentioned, Texas Tech, West Virginia, Kansas, he had 12 passing touchdowns in those 3 games. So he averaged 4 passing touchdowns, 0 interceptions in those games. Averaged basically 310 yards passing in those games. Completed what's the completions? He completed 74, 72, and 66% passes in those games. And those are 3 coaches that saw him firsthand do that. And they averaged 45, 49, and 59 points. So anyways, that's our rant for the day. A lot of excitement. That one was kind of overshadowed the all Big 12 mentions, but a lot of good names and a lot of good production on that list for Baylor in a really big league now. Obviously, you love seeing 2 tight ends on that list. You see running back, redshirt freshman running back getting some attention, some honorable mention notice, and a running back league, a league that had really good running backs this year. I mean, Taj Brooks not even being first or second team. I don't know if I'm assuming he got honorable mention, but that shows how good this league was. And Bryson Washington was right up there after he got through the rest of the season. So any final thoughts? So bowl game, all Big 12, and where Baylor is football-wise going into this part of December.
Just really excited to see what the bowl situation ends up with. I know Baylor is really excited about getting ready for bowl prep and getting ready for a bowl game, mixed in with the fact that now they're going to be operating with the transfer portal here starting on Monday. So there's a lot that's coming up right now, but I think Baylor's in such a great spot after signing day, after winning 8 games, and just trying to continue building on momentum. It's a great time, I think, to be a Baylor Bear, and a great time for, Dave Rand and this staff to really capitalize on the momentum they gained in the season.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll know about the bowl game probably over the weekend, but we'll see where they end up. I mean, it looks like the Texas Bowl is probable, but they also have a chance at the Pop-Tarts Bowl and maybe the Liberty Bowl. But we'll know. There's 3 kind of options there. So, all right, Baylor fans, that's going to do it for this episode of Inside Baylor Sports. As always, thank you for listening. For Grayson Grunhafer, I'm Colt Barber. Have a great weekend, and Sick 'em Bears.